Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Mummy, which is currently on HBO Max. So, while kind of watching this film, I can't help but think that this movie is just really fun. I want to try to avoid using the word adventure, but I usually use that all the time. But this movie is an adventure. It is a real fun ride, so to speak. Really, for this movie, it is kind of surprising that this movie still holds up well. Like, there is, of course, spots when you are to look at Emotep's mouth, and it just looks really goofy or out of place when looking at it now. But other than that, most of this movie actually looks like a pretty decent film. And like the story is still good enough. Uh, Really, for probably people that haven't seen this movie, because really to me, I would feel like this is like in between like a good or great kind of film. Like it has that like good enough action. We have like Brendan, who plays this character called Rick O'Connell, which is this really fun character that like is kind of like in your face or just kind of one of those like especially the spot where Brandon and like Imhotep are to be like at one another and like and Rick's like right back at him. It's like really hilarious. Like that's probably the best scene in the movie is that consistent and like shouting at one another. So uh, but going into this film, I would say it's like good between good and great territory. There's kind of that middle of the road there, just because like more than likely, like this is a good enough film, but like I don't know where to really place this one. Like this one's kind of hard because a lot of people would just say like, there's a slow build with this or whichever, but like I don't know. I just find this movie to just be like an interesting tale. So, what ends up going down in this movie for realsies? So, I had to throw that in there just for sakes. So, what ends up happening, teeing up fashion, is we have, of course, Emotep, who is to have an affair with an Egyptian, of course, named Noxuna Moon, and so because of that, there is to be a guy who is to get freaking mummified and uh, be imprisoned seemingly forever until eventually we have both Rick and Evelyn's character who ends up freeing them because these people are way too curious. And plus also, we desperately have these characters that are to want to find the Book of the Dead, and also like as if this is an Evil Dead movie. Like, hey man, I can't wait to read this book and just open up something. Like, hopefully, we just like open up the floodgates for just everything to come back and kill us. Just, I hope we open up a whole entire graveyard of people. Wouldn't that be great? So, like we have the Book of the Dead, and then I think we have the other book, some gold book. Weirdly, I don't know, 2 hours of a movie. But anyways, so uh, and so like most of this journey of this movie is to get them to this location where Imhotep's grave is, and then like the second part of it is the adventure of of quite possibly taking down Imhotep once he is to resurrect himself and then suck the lives out of some people. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's pretty much what happens through a bulk of this movie. So gear up for it if you've never heard of this movie before. It's kind of interesting because supposedly, like, recently there is some like resurgence of Brendan Fraser for whatever Frazier. I'm gonna ill pronounce it. I apologize. Brandon's character, Brendan as an actor, like bizarrely, everybody is just saying that, like Brendan is like the new Keanu Reeves right now. I don't know why. Like, I guess he just has an upswing coming for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe they're doing another Mummy movie. I don't know. That'd be great, but who knows? So, but yeah, anyways, let's go into that double five time territory. I hope for the best for Brandon. Freaking, I watched Doom Patrol and I loved Doom Patrol. So if anybody hasn't already like have a subscription for HBO Max, go ahead and do it to watch Doom Patrol, or you could probably go into the two apps that I've consistently mentioned to people so that way you can watch everything for free, basically. Go into an app called Letter C Movies, and you could pretty much see everything. So letter C and then movies, so C Movies. Or you can go into Fox HD Movies. The logo will say so, but I think the app says like play 1080p movies. If you go and you put the words in of Fox HD Movies, you should probably easily be able to have the app come up quickly. But yeah, if you have Google Play, go out of your way to do those apps. Not sponsored. Because, anyways. So, yeah, let's just go into that double five if I haven't already. Because I think it is that coveted time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about the time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, going into it deliciously. So, what we have in this movie is to showcase that we have Brandon Fraser's character, who is Rick O'Connell, who is to be this military guy who is to be fighting this military war in Cairo. It seems like he's an American compared to all the people that I guess he's with the most of this movie, with the exception of probably Benny. So, what ends up happening is Rick's character is to eventually try and fight a war that obviously he can't win. We have Rick's superior that goes and runs off, and so Benny's like, well, I guess you were promoted. So eventually, like, these guys try to fight this battle, and then of course both Benny and Rick are forced to run off, which leads Rick to eventually stumble upon this hidden place that I guess was to bury Imhotep. And so now we'll go back and also cover the Imhotep Noxunamun part. So Imhotep is a sneak into, and this is Egyptian time period, whichever thing, before moment of course, Rick finding Imhotep's tomb. Anyway, pushing on. So, tomb is probably not the correct word, but whatever place that Imhotep was being held at, whatever that thing was. But you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm getting at? So, how did that lead to that moment? Well, Imhotep was having an affair with Noxunamun, and so all of a sudden, we eventually have Imhotep who ends up getting killed for his treachery for even looking at this woman. So Noxunamun is just like, well, hey, like, Imhotep, you can easily resurrect me. It's like, just get out of here. Like, you'll just be able to resurrect me. And so Noxunamun just goes and takes a knife and then just stabs herself from like, whoa. Like, freaking, like, okay there, lady. Like, I guess you're just gonna, like, Damien, this one's for you. Maybe not. Anyways, so Imhotep gets mummified as well as any of his members of people that he's worked with through the years. And so supposedly Imhotep was supposedly given the worst possible curse that he could have ever been cursed with. Plus also, like, they tried to give him, like, the most heinous way to die possible. Like, supposedly there was, like, bugs, like, surrounding all of these bates. And, like, so these people were to be eaten to death because they were to be mummified alive. But technically they're going to die because freaking bugs are just eaten alive at them and whatever. And eventually these bugs come back to eventually go through people's, like, bodies and skins and whatever. And and just have a good time with their meal of choice. So, I think that covers all the past stuff. So, let's get into let's get into current time. So, we have a girl named Evie or Evelyn. I think Jonathan usually calls her Evie, I think. So, Evelyn is to be this curator of this library, or she's to be a library woman, which, like, really, with looking at, like, library woman, isn't that great? Funny enough, we have Evelyn, who is to have, like, the worst possible ladder to go and do this kind of thing with stacking books. And so Evelyn decides that she's gonna go and not have these books just float from one thing to the other like Ghostbusters does. Sadly enough, uh, Evelyn is just like, oh well, I can just easily take this one book from over here and put it all the way from over here, because there's another bookshelf that I want to get to, and so all of a sudden Evelyn is to have this ladder like come back at her, and then so she's just kind of like standing like on this ladder and trying to figure out how, like, help me, someone help me. Like, either way you're gonna have to like fall somehow somewhere. You need something to break your fall, or you're going to freaking break your bate or your back or something. So Evelyn just goes and pushes or puts the ladder like back against the bookcase. That just knocks the bookcase, and then all of a sudden we have all this domino effect of bookcases. And so all of a sudden we have Evelyn's boss, who is Dr. Terrence Bay, who is to mention, like, really, woman? Like, you know what? Like, I would have the plague. I would have, like, the worst possible thing in my life. Like, I will have any worser things, like any, like, horrifying thing that could ever happen instead of you being here working for me. Like, you are the worst. Like, then just fire her. Fire her right then and there. Like, could you not find anybody else to do this job? No? Oh, wait, script will tell you to not fire her? Oh, okay. So, because she's needed for the rest of this movie for whatever reason. So, Terrence is just like, God, she's the worst. She's the worst. I should fire her right now, but I won't because script will tell me not to. So, Evelyn, instead of doing what she was told to do, which was to, fix this whole like bookshelf situation, we have immediately Evelyn just going off to the Egypt exhibit part of this like museum slash library slash whatever this is, because Evelyn is still a great librarian slash museum slash person. Like, she should have just got fired. So Evelyn is making her way through these Egyptian part things to eventually have some supposed mummy come out of its grave, and all of a sudden we just see Jonathan, who's like, ha ha ha, I got you. And Evelyn's like, yeah, like, freaking maybe you should be dead like this thing is. Like, just go ahead. Just, like, hurry up and just die. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm severely paraphrasing here, but, like, so Jonathan is, of course, drunk for the 800th time, because he's always drunk. Like, I think he lives and breathes alcohol to just be drunk 24/11. I don't know. So, Jonathan is to eventually go and to say, well, hey, like, you know what? I have some trinket that I can give to you that I won off some, like, poker table thing against, of course, Rick O'Connell, who eventually, I guess, punched Jonathan in the face, I'm assuming. So Jonathan ends up giving his sister this the thing that's the key to the Book of the Dead, but also seemingly also the coffin to open Emotep, and also some good times, right? Whatever. Anyway, uh, so eventually we also have a map. Like, man, this is like a Comic-Con exclusive. Like, hey, man, like, it doesn't end there. It's not just a key. It's also a thing of the map to tell us where, I think it was Akhman Ra? Who is something Akhman Ra? I swear there was like Akhman Ra somewhere in here. The name sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it. Uh, anyways, Evelyn takes this to her superior, I guess, to get some brownie points so that way she doesn't get fired today. And what ends up happening is her boss is to all of a sudden just go, yeah, wow, this is a really cool map. I'm going to go and try to burn it as quickly as possible. And then also just kind of like toss it like in front of my desk so that way I can't like douse out the flames with anything. And then so we have both Jonathan and Eve kind of like patting it down. And so they're like, and Jonathan's like, you burned some of the map. And the guy's like, oh, well, like, maybe it was a good thing that I did it because we find out that the Dr. Terrence Bay is part of some secret society that is also attached to our Death Bay, which is going to be the main guy who has like the tattoos over his eyes, like he's a football player. And of course, like it's kind of funny when I see this guy because immediately when he did anything else after this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the guy from The Mummy. I remember that guy because he did basically every single one of those films. And so we end up like I saw him in like Resident Evil. I'm like, hey, that's the guy from The Mummy. So, but anyways, so we push on uh, to eventually having Jonathan like telling Eve where exactly that she got this key from, and that leads them to go to Rick O'Connell, which evidently Rick O'Connell is to be imprisoned. Like I don't remember the reasoning why, but like he ends up being imprisoned, and so now uh Evelyn is going and having to bargain with a guy named Warden Gad Hassan to try and get Rick released. So that way she can go and take him to. Yeah, I think Akhman Ra has. Maybe that's the Night of Museum thing, and that has nothing to do with what I'm saying here. I don't know where I got Akhman Ra from. I don't know. A lot of Egyptian things. Anyways, so uh pushing on here. So we get to the pricing of releasing Rick towards like 500 pounds or 500 something, and eventually they just go and hang Rick and then just go and like release the thing from underneath him to make him drop. And he doesn't have his neck break, and now he's just choking to death. So we have the warden who makes like a bid of just saying, well, hey, like, what else could I probably get from you? I'm a very lonely man, you know. And he starts like touching her leg and slaps him. Freaking. Uh, Evelyn is to eventually make a bargain with this warden to just say, well, this guy is going to this certain location, and if anything, we're going to give you like a certain like percentage of whatever we get from this findings. Like I think eventually they make the bargain for like 25%. after this like haggling, which eventually the warden ends up messing up with, so he ends up just getting like 25% supposedly. But this warden eventually goes with them, and eventually ends up sadly dying because he ends up finding one of those bugs that end up crawling all up in his bate, and so it ends up basically killing him. And why wouldn't it? So what ends up happening is Rick, while in prison, is to end up kissing Evelyn and say that, hey, like, you gotta get me free, which kind of leads to this, like, having a possible romantic relationship between these two characters, and they kind of play with it quite a bit in this movie. So, eventually it seems like they are not alone in this journey, and it seems like there is also a bunch of Americans that are to also be going into the same journey as both Rick and Evelyn are too. So what ends up happening is consistently we have Evelyn or Jonathan just kind of making fun of the Americans consistently, but they all say, "Hey, no offense, Rick," and Rick is just like, I don't care." So uh, we end up transitioning these people to some like export boat. So they end up going on into this boat, and so that eventually leads them. I'm going to pause here for a second. But anyways, so we go on this boat, and that eventually leads to the boat ending up landing on fire. We kind of have Rick and Benny who are at odds because Benny is to be going with the Americans because Benny is to say, "Oh, well, I found this place too." And so, like, hey, I'm going to take these Americans here, and they want to also get to the secret of the uh, of this whole like thing that I found. So if anything, they're trying to get to the better of one another, and it just leads to eventually Rick just going and tossing Benny off to the side of this boat. But eventually, what ends up happening in this boat, anyways, because we have the secret service people, the guys who are to be with Ardith Bay, are to eventually break into this boat to try to get the key from Evelyn, and that leads into a just fire upon this boat. And we also have this spot where Rick is just kind of like rolling out all these guns on this bed or on this table to eventually get ready for like something to happen during this journey because eventually someone is going to probably start to go after somebody in here, and plus also like you don't know who to trust really. So uh but anyways, so what ends up happening is Evelyn forcibly, without having to be able to get dressed or whatever, she's basically in her pajamas as she is to basically jump off this boat. We have Rick who is having to forcibly fight off these Secret Service like men, and like whatever like the secret servant men. I don't know what the exact title was, but so uh, what ends up happening is we have Rick on one side of the river and Benny on one side of the river, and Benny's like kind of like touting about like, hey, 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 like I have all the horses, and Rick is like, well, you're on the wrong side of the river, and then Benny's like, oh crap. It's like, ha ha ha, sucks to be you. So Jonathan eventually is to pay for camels, and like they're haggling over camels and so on and so forth. So eventually this is to have us push on to, of course, having these people make their way to the spot of Imhotep's location. And so with the way of which that these people are to go into certain locations, uh, Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan end up going to the spot where Imhotep had been buried, and Evelyn is to have the key so she unlocks uh, Imhotep's grave. And they end up finding out that supposedly, like, his body is still, like, decomposing. Like, it should be, like, all, like, bones and whatever, and but, like, no. Like, it's just decomposing weirdly. So, still to this day, weirdly enough, like, several amounts of time later. And so the Americans, when eventually they go to their location, they end up finding a bunch of kept body parts, and like supposedly the Americans think that what they found was a lot more valuable. We have one spot where the guys were to go and try to open this one thing, and we had God, what which where uh we have one God, where is he? It doesn't matter. Uh, we have one of the Americans who are just like, hey, like, let the servants go and open this thing up. Yeah, they end up opening it up and they end up getting freaking hurt in the process. So, but yeah, the Americans are just kind of boasting about what they found because they end up finding the Book of the Dead. The only thing is that they don't have, like, the key to open it up, which Evelyn has. So while everyone's sleeping, Evelyn is to eventually open up the Book of the Dead. And of course, like any stupid person, that whenever there's a book that just has to be read, Evelyn is to pop that bad boy open like nobody's business and just start just saying all kinds of whatever. Because, like, she knows better, right? Like, I guess so. So Evelyn just starts reading whatever because she's like, well, a book never hurt anybody, right? So you think. So Evelyn starts like talking, and we have the one American who's like, "Don't read from the book." All the because when the book freaking opens, like it bizarrely like creates like this wind gust or something. It's weird. And Bren and Rick is just like, "Yeah, that just seems normal, right?" So Evelyn reads from the book, and then all of a sudden we have this mummy that is to come to life, and all of a sudden he's like, "Dude, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna suck down freaking uh, one guy," and because once this mummy starts like kind of roaming around, and because all these locusts are to just start popping in and start attacking people, which pushes everybody where the spot of Emotep was. Emotep just starts like rolling around. It's like, hey, like I'm gonna go and get this one guy. And I'm gonna go and just like take his freaking eyes away from him, and also his tongue. So uh, we have the one guy who now has no eyes, no tongue, and because he had glasses, and like he's like, I can't find my glasses. Can you help me find my like? Because freaking Benny broke them. So, uh, so Emotep has this guy's eyes and tongue, and eventually we continue to have Emotep that is to consistently find Evelyn and call her his Noxunamun because bizarrely they look alike for whatever reason. I think when we get into the second one, we'll start to see that it's either I think it's the second one where uh where Evelyn has some kind of like ancestry kind of thing that is tied to Noxunamun, and I guess that's what makes her kind of look like, I don't know, it's weird. So uh but yeah, so we have eventually uh Imhotep that is to confront Brandon or Rick, and so Rick fires into it with a shotgun, thinking that it's dead, and so eventually what ends up happening is the secret servants end up coming and are like, oh no, like you've woken something that's been asleep for thousands of years. And it's like, well, that's great and all. Like, I think, like, Rick is like, I think I took care of it. And uh, we have uh, we have Ardith who's like, no, like this thing doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep. Like I was just waiting for like the Terminator thing where it's like it doesn't feel pity or remorse and it absolutely will not stop. Like I was waiting for those lines to be kind of dipped in here. So uh eventually what happens is that Emotep eventually is to go after the Americans and Rick and Evelyn when they are to be back in town because eventually Imhotep is to tie himself onto Benny because Benny is to try to like pray to every single god that he can about like him hopefully being ushered into heaven when he is to die. And so all of a sudden Imhotep is to realize that this guy had the language of the slaves, and so Imhotep and Benny was just like, hey, let's partner up. Like Imhotep is kind of showing them, hey, like I'll give you some rewards, like if you help me. And Benny's like, heck yeah, that sounds great. So uh, eventually, once Rick and the Americans are back in town, really they start to realize because eventually uh, Evelyn is to go back to her boss that is to be tied to Ardith, and they find that hey, like the Americans are gonna get freaking like sucked the life out of, and Imhotep is basically going to kill anyone that had opened up his like grave. That's gonna be his like key thing is to take down every single person that was involved in his resurrection. So I'm like, oh, that's great. So and they also realize it's like, yeah, like Imhotep is coming for Evelyn to try and resurrect Noxuna Moon, so like Evelyn could become Noxuna Moon. So Rick decides that he's gonna go and lock Evelyn into a room and have the Americans kind of watch over her. So what eventually ends up happening is, of course, like Imhotep is to go and finish the job of the one guy who is blind and to basically just suck the life out of him. And eventually Imhotep is to find the one like guy who is to mention like don't read from the book and like suck him down. And so that just leaves like two American guys left. But eventually, of course, like Imhotep just goes and like easily, like eventually just sucks them all down, like quite easily, just sucks them all, just like so, with the exclusion of that like whole jaw thing getting effed up. So, uh, Imhotep is to eventually make his way to Evelyn and kiss her again, which leads Rick to eventually shoot him again, and have them like scramble out of there to eventually have Evelyn try to figure out where the gold book is. Because if the Book of the Dead was to resurrect Imhotep, the other book is to do the opposite. So Evelyn had to figure out exactly where the other book was, so she kind of had to go through this whole like weird mapping system to eventually find it out. And then she was like really proud of herself. It's like, oh, okay, great. Like we gotta know. We now have to go back to that place to eventually go and get this book. So, but what ends up eventually happening is Emotep ends up taking Evelyn, and then Rick eventually has to go and get an old man who is to be uh, this guy with the plane to make their way back to where Emotep is. So that eventually lands us into having this sand attack that Imhotep ends up doing, where he like rises this whole like huge thing of sand, then ends up having this like face being showcased, where Rick is trying to like shoot it, but there's nothing he can do. To where eventually like the sand just consumes this plane. It ends up killing this old pilot, but we had like Ardith and we had Jonathan, who were kind of just like strapped to the side of the plane. So Rick is asking, like, "Hey, Jonathan, like, how's it going? Like, how do you think it's going?" And then he whistles to like Ardith, and he's like, "How you doing?" Like, freaking, like, so, like, God, like Brandon, like the early years of Brandon Fraser, was just really fun. Like, really, just like some good comedy there. Just some really good stuff. Um, so of course, what ends up happening is Imhotep is to go back into this one spot to eventually go and try and resurrect Moon. Uh, Moon and I think Edith have this, or Edith, Evelyn have this kind of like fight out, but eventually what ends up happening is they end up going and scrambling to go and find the gold book. And so Brandon is to eventually try and kill off a lot of Imhotep's men while they're scrambling to go and get this gold book. Or I think Jonathan is going and trying to scramble to get it because Evelyn is like having to deal with Moon, and Rick is dealing with Imhotep's men and having to just try to take them down. And how like Imhotep's men are just like, "Ah!" And like Rick is just like, okay, this is creepy. So, but eventually Rick is to just kind of take him down. So we have Rick, who's now trying to figure out how to take Imhotep down, but really anything that he's going to do is going to be pointless. So eventually Evelyn is to get the book out and is to say a couple words, and all of a sudden we have this ghostly chariot that ends up going and hitting Imhotep, which is to grab this spirit away from him, where Rick's character eventually goes and grabs this sword and stabs Imhotep because now Imhotep is mortal. So all of a sudden we have Imhotep, who is just kind of walking into this weird looking pool of a thing to basically just get consumed by this thing, and eventually like having all of his stuff decompose, and like we are led to believe that like this thing is to have been dead forever until quite possible sequel. So what ends up also happening is a place that they are to be in at the end of this movie, which I don't think is the exact same spot, but whatever. So eventually this place is to eventually like come in on itself, where it's like to basically close. Benny is scrambling to get any fortunes that he possibly can, uh, while Imhotep is doing his thing. But uh, what ends up happening while everyone is trying to scramble the heck out of there is Benny ends up trying to get out of there, but he is to not be able to. And like Rick is trying to help him, but eventually Benny just gets stuck. So Benny is just like, well, I guess I'm just stuck in this tomb. Man, does that suck? But like, hey, at least I'm like around all this fortune, right? I guess I gotta like have some kind of good thing with this, right? All of a sudden, we start having this location that is to be covered head to toe with all of these bugs yet again, where it's like, yeah, Benny, you're gonna die. Like these bugs are gonna horribly kill you. So really, that just leads with these people not really having much to really show for it, as far as an award or anything of that of like, but they do have tons of gold and whatever from what Benny had got. So really, I guess that's all they need. So Rick and Evelyn at the end of this kiss because they kind of been playing at this anyways. Like there's the one spot where Evelyn was to be really drunk after getting the Book of the Dead, and like Rick was trying to like take care of her, and like I think Evelyn was almost kind of throwing herself at Rick at that point. So, uh, but yeah, so once both Rick and Evelyn kiss, we have Jonathan who ends up like, "Hey, like Campbell, how about you and me have a smooch?" And then he ends up regretting that, and so eventually they just ride off into the sunset technically with all of this gold to make their way back. So yeah, with that said, I think I covered most of this movie, but I also tried to rush through it as well. But yeah, like I'm trying to think it was if there was any spot that I forgot to mention during here. There probably was because this is a 2 hour movie. Uh if anything, I probably might have like skipped about some like little detailed things or try to rush through something. Anyways, I'm sure there's a heavily detailed thing that somebody will be like, oh yeah, you forgot about this one piece, and they'll tell me all about it, which I'm sure. Uh, because I'm sure they'll probably like tell me like the detailed name of something. Uh, but anyways, like, like Nox Sunamoon like was killed too. Like, I don't think it matters. Like, she was killed because there wasn't enough time to like put together the ceremony. Uh, yeah. I'm trying to think of everything's accurate. Anyways, so yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about The Mummy. A fun movie, an adventure of a film. I don't know if I want to go and watch any of the other movie Mummy films. If they are popular, or like maybe there might be a Scorpion King or something like that in there that people might like. Maybe I'll go and I'll review those. I don't mind the Scorpion King movies. Like I actually watched like even the later ones that probably weren't held in high regard because why would they? But anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.